Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be talking about carbon. We know that carbon is element number 6 on the periodic table. Carbon also is pretty important to life. It's kind of a big deal. There's a whole reason why we're called carbon-based life forms. So today we're going to learn about some of the major types of molecules that we can make with carbon that are vital to life. We're going to learn how they're put together and maybe some examples of those. So, pro tip, your assignment with this lesson is to fill out a chart for the different categories of macromolecules. It should be in a Google Doc. I'm going to be pointing out the parts that go in there, and at the very end, I'll kind of fill out a sample row and show you. So hopefully you're following along. I feel the chart is going to be easier for y'all to study than maybe trying to take notes for all of this, although you're welcome to do both, but the chart you're going to turn in. Okay, so carbon has some unique bonding properties. Carbon's cool because it can form covalent bonds with up to 4 other atoms, including other carbon atoms. Okay, so carbon just ends up being in everything, and there's 3 general structures that it can have. It can have a straight chain, so sometimes it's just side by side like that, sometimes it branches off, and sometimes it's a ring. So hexane, that's sort of like a fuel. That's how you're going to see like hydrocarbons, like gasoline built. The ring vanillin, that's actually an artificial flavor. That's what makes vanilla smell the way that it does. Fun fact. Yeah. Okay, so an idea we need to get across. Sorry, let me move my face so y'all can see the slides. Can I go up here? Yeah, I'm gonna go up here. Okay, so many carbon-based molecules are made of small subunits. Okay, so that's what we're gonna focus a lot on, especially in your chart. So the word monomer means the individual subunit, so the little pieces. A polymer is made of many monomers. Okay, so poly, it says on our slide, it means many. Okay, mono means 1. So a monomer is 1 and a polymer is made of many. So if this was, say, like a starch, each of these would be 1 subunit of like a sugar or something, and they repeat. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is carbohydrates. They're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and it's in a 1:2 to 1 ratio. I wish I could use my iPad for this, but I can't because I'm at school. Boo. But yeah, so that 1:2 to 1 ratio is super important, and that's why it's a carbohydrate, because we have carbons and then H2O, which is water. Okay, so carbohydrates. So this is what glucose or a basic sugar looks like, and it's often shown as a simplified hexagon. Yeah. So an example of carbohydrates includes sugars and starches. So if you're filling out your chart where it says examples, you could put sugars and starches over there. So she's double dipping over here in this picture. She's got powdered sugar, but there's also starch in the cake. So she's got both. So the monosaccharide is going to be the monomer. Mono means 1. This should be the easiest one. Monosaccharide is the monomer. So it's 1 sugar. Polysaccharides are the polymers. So there's many sugars. So these polymers include starches, cellulose, and glycogen. Okay, starch we're familiar with. Cellulose, a little bit. That's like dietary fiber. And then glycogen. So fun fact, if you guys know anybody with diabetes, you know that they can't just go eat a bunch of starchy foods, right? The whole reason is that starch is a polymer sugar, okay? So a starch is just a whole bunch of glucose molecules stuck together, okay? So your body is super good at just popping off those sugars off that starch and making it into blood sugar. So that's why they can't have those, because it turns into blood sugar real quick. Even if the food's salty, it doesn't matter. Okay, So carbohydrates provide energy for cells, so that would be a function. All right, some are part of cell structure and some of them are energy. So starches is energy storage, okay? Cellulose is structure. And I should have a little example slide in a minute. So other examples of carbohydrates. Chitin is probably unfamiliar to you, but chitin is found in cell walls of fungi. So mushrooms aren't plants, they're a fungus, and their cell walls are different. But the cell walls of insects and crustaceans, that's also chitin. So what makes the outside of a crawfish crunchy, that's chitin. It's a type of carbohydrate. Cellulose is what makes plants crunchy, is the basic way to think of that. So like what makes a tree hard to the touch, it's got a whole bunch of cellulose in it. And like carrots, that's why they have that crunch to them, is there's a lot of cellulose in their cell walls. So lipids, so this would be your second row. They're nonpolar and they include fats, oils, and cholesterols. So that would be what we'll go over in examples, right? So monomers are going to be the glycerol and fatty acids. So we have something called a triglyceride here. So here's a glycerol and it has 3 fatty acid tails. So tri means 3. Keep that in mind. Okay, so lipids have several functions. They're energy storage, like long-term energy storage. That's what the fat in your body's for. But it's important in cell membranes, which is like the little sac that holds your cells together. And then hormones. So we think of hormones like, you know, she's in a bad mood because of her hormones. That's usually what you think of. So like estrogen is a hormone, but so is cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which everybody's got a ton of right now. Everybody's got that stress. Testosterone is a hormone. Adrenaline is a hormone. So these are all made out of fats. They're fat-based. So, okay, this is a kind of an aside. I don't know if you've heard of this. There's something called amenorrhea, and that's when a woman loses too much body fat and actually she doesn't make enough hormones and she stopped having her normal cycle. That happens because in a human, your fat cells are actually responsible for making some of those hormones. So if your body fat drops too low, especially as a female, you have hormone imbalances and hormone problems. So that's why that happens. It's most common in like ballerinas and gymnasts. But anyway, that's kind of an aside. Okay, so there's a couple main types. This is like real world stuff right here, so perk your ears up. So you've heard of saturated and unsaturated fat. The difference between those two is saturated fats have all single carbon bonds and they're solid at room temperature. This slide right now, be familiar with this. You're gonna need to know these facts on a test. You need to know saturated fat, all single bonds, solid at room temperature. Unsaturated has at least 1 double bond in its carbon chain. So like this double bond over here, this doesn't count. We're talking about right here. They're all single bonds. And unsaturated fat, we got a couple of these double bonds here. So that makes it liquid at room temperature. So like olive oil is unsaturated fat. You may hear that's a good fat. It's better for your heart. Lard is solid at room temperature, or even like butter and Crisco. So those are saturated fats that we have to eat less of. All right, phospholipids are super important. This would be another example on your chart. This is how we make our cell membranes. So it has a polar head and a non-polar tail. And this is important because the polar heads will face out and the non-polar ends face each other. So it makes this double layer around cells to help keep your cell bits inside and help keep everything else out. Okay, proteins. The monomer is an amino acid and the polymer is a protein. There are 20 different amino acids used to build all the proteins. And what's interesting is all life on Earth uses the same amino acid code. like your DNA in a fish, DNA in a person, the same codes for the same protein. We're going to get more into that in, I think, like unit 2, unit 3, somewhere in there. But we'll cover that more in depth. But be aware there's 20 amino acids, and it's important. So amino acids are all the same except for their side group. And they're linked by something called peptide bonds. I promise you this is on your test. I promise. So if you're taking notes, write it down because you're going to need to know this to study. Those of you not taking notes are going to be in a bad way when I pass out study guides. Okay, so the order of amino acids lets a protein have its shape. So proteins do have a, like there's the order of the amino acids and then they fold in on themselves. If you put the incorrect amino acids in there, that's going to change the whole shape of the protein. This is what happens when you cook meat. You apply heat and you change some of those bonds and it changes the shape and thus the protein. So it can't do what it normally does if you change its shape. Okay, nucleic acids, last one, guys. So the monomer is a nucleotide and a polymer is usually our DNA or our RNA. So this right here, if you can see my little arrow moving, probably not, but that's one nucleotide. So the T, the little pentagon, and the circle thing, that's one nucleotide. Oh, here's a better picture. Okay, so nucleotides are made of a sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. So in this case, this is a nucleotide that would go with RNA. Like I said, don't worry about what that is right this second. We're going to get into that in a different unit. So the phosphate group is the blue ball, and then the sugar, and then this has nitrogen in it, but it's a base. So if you ever see like the letters like A, T, G, C with DNA, those are referring to the bases. So DNA and RNA are also examples of nucleic acids, and DNA, its job is to store genetic information, so that's its function or purpose, and RNA helps build proteins. You're going to learn all about how all that mess works later. Okay, so what you need to do right now is, if you have not filled out your chart as you go, you need to start filling that out. So let me get out of here and I will show you your chart. Okay, so here's your function chart in a Google Doc. Everyone will get their own copy. So for macromolecule, that's one of the big 4 things that we talked about. So I can make it big, maybe not that big. All right, so we said carbohydrate. I made it too big. Why? You can resize the boxes if you want. I'm not going to be picky about that. So we said the monomer was what? It was a monosaccharide. If you got, like I said, if you got to resize it, whatever you got to do, that's fine. A polymer was a polysaccharide. So function, what it did, we said it had a structure function, but it also was quick energy. So some examples we said was starch, cellulose, chitin, sugar, all those good things, okay? So you're gonna go down and fill out the whole rest of the chart. If you have other information that you want to add into this, this would be a good resource for you to use when you're studying, because there's still gonna be tests in here, guys. So please let me know if you have any questions about what I want you to do. Do your best, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys.